Okay, so now we are finishing up this section about the accumulator. And last video, I kind of showed you how to use console.log. Console.log, again, is a tool that you're going to use throughout your career. The question and the key is to know where to put the console.log to be able to get back the input or information that you're looking for. You're going to use console.log a lot to debug your programs and trying to find out is things being reached, especially when we get into function. Is this function being reached? We use console.logs to help us find that out. There's another tool called a debugger, but console.log works really good. So if you're new to this channel and you're not a part of the cohort, the curriculum is in the description. You can click it. It's free, so you can follow along with us as well. So let's finish up and let's get back into the curriculum. So we finished that up, understanding how we got to 21. I wanted you to make sure you saw how it worked in code, because it's so easy to just write this code, and if you already know what the result is, yes, 21, because you already did the math, you got the result. But you want to see how it actually works in code, so make sure you watch part 1 if you haven't already. Now, the variable total is initialized to 0. Okay, we see that we initialized it to 0. The loop execute once each for the values of I from 1 to 6. Each time the loop body executes, the next value of I is added to the total. So let's make sure you understand what we say when the body is executed. Remember, everything inside these curly braces, opening, closing curly braces, is the body. So remember, we're initializing it at 1, which is I, and then we're going to do the conditional, go through the conditional. Is I less than equal to n? True. So now we're allowing this body to run. It does its thing. It updates the way we want it to update, store it into total, and then this part of the actual for loop kicks in after this is ran. That's what that means. So the loop carries out the same basic algorithm that we use to compute the sum 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 by hand. The only step that may seem different to you is the use of the variable total to keep track of the running total. Like I was saying, whenever you see this in your code where a total or whatever variable is initialized to 0 is using to keep track of some code, like in this case a number is looking to keep track of whatever is going to be iterated over sorry, and so it's going to be stored inside this total. But notice here, this is what we call global. This for loop has access to that total. Now, if you remember in the last video, we tried to run the console.log with the total with the I index or the bracket notation, and we got a reference error. Well, we don't get a reference error with this total because total is already been defined on the global scope. So this for loop has access to that total. There's something to keep in mind. So I will explain more, but understand, pay attention to how this code has been written for you. And so here, we know that it's keeping a running total in our head. With programming, however, we must explicitly store such a value in a variable. You're going to do this a lot. So always think when you're trying to figure out something and you're not getting the results you're looking for, think, did I create a variable? Sometimes in a function, especially when we get the functions, you're going to create these variables inside of the scope of the function, and sometimes you're going to create them globally so other functions can have access to them as well. But in this case, we made total global so that this for loop can have access to that total. Now, this pattern of initialization a variable to some basics or empty values and updating it within a loop is commonly referred to as the accumulator pattern. This is what that means. This pattern of initializing a variable to some basic or empty value and updating it with a loop is commonly referred to as an accumulator pattern. Make sure you understand what this means. We refer to the variable as the accumulator. So this is the shorthand. Now, when you are asked a question and we use such words or terms like this, your go-to is to understand this is what we're talking about. We want you to use the accumulator pattern, so there's a standard on how to write an accumulating pattern. In the example above, total is the accumulator, right? So total is the accumulator because it's holding what? It's running total. It's keeping track of the running total. So this is the accumulator with this compound operator with the plus and equal sign. I showed you the long form. This is the short form on how to write the compound operator. Now, in the example above, right here, the accumulator pattern comes up regularly in programming. The key to using it successfully is to initialize the accumulator variable before you start the iteration. Once inside the loop, update the accumulator. Right, see, we have the total inside of the loop. So this is the accumulator. This is the thing that's holding what? The values that we're trying to keep track of. Remember, you're keeping track of something. All right. So, reversing a string. While some programming languages have a string method that will reverse a given string, JavaScript does not. Pay attention to what I just read. While some programming languages have a string method that will reverse a given string, JavaScript does not. Let's see how we can write our own program that reverse a string using the accumulator operator or pattern. Open up the reversing a string in .js in the loop chapter example in the JavaScript project to experiment with this use of the accumulator pattern. So we will start by initializing two variables, the string we want to reverse and a variable that will eventually store the reverse value of the given string. So here we go. We created a variable named string str and we passed in the string blue. And then let's reverse it. We're using another variable that we have created to reverse a string. And notice that we have an empty string here. This is when you see empty variables with empty string, this means you're going to use it to store values in, update some, add something to it. So this is why we have a reverse string, because we're going to want to store our output here. Now, here, reversed is our accumulator variable. So we have the accumulator variable. Why? Because again, we read it up here. What that means, a variable is running total or is running information, or in this case, the characters of a string. And so that is our accumulator variable. Our approach to reversing the string would be to loop over the string str, which is the variable name str, adding each subsequent character to the beginning of the reversed so that the first character becomes the last and the last character becomes the first. So this is the result that we're looking for, and this is the actual code right here. You know me, we got to play around with it. I'm going to show you another way to do this if you don't want to open up the VS Code, but I just want to show you. I can come in here to the console. You can do a lot of your work here in the console. So you definitely want to get familiar with the console. So I'm copying it to the clipboard, and then I'm now pasting it in. So now let's make it run to make sure it works. So it's working, right? So again, you want to see how this is working. How did it get to EULB? Remember, reversed is our accumulator, right? So notice here we don't have the plus equal because we have this string, because we're not doing a number, we're doing a string. So look at the syntax here. We created a variable, initialized it at 0 because I want the 0 index because it's a string, and then I'm using the .length property on the str variable, which is an object that's holding the string blue. And then when that's true, it's going to loop over it. It's going to check, is there something at index 0, I less than string.length, which is true. And then it runs through this right here. What it does is this has to be in the right order. So this is what you have to understand. We got str and we're passing in the bracket I. And then we're giving our accumulator, we're reversing it, and we're storing it inside of this particular variable. Now everything is reading from left to right. Okay, so here the first thing is if it's the first letter that is iterated over 0, which would be the B. And so I got the B plus reversed. Now I'm putting that B here because I want to reverse it. I want it to store there. And so it's going to put it at the end. And then it's just going to keep building up to the LUE, because that's why we reversed it. If I reverse this and put reverse first, then it's going to be in the normal order. So let's first look at that. So I'm just pushing up my arrow, and then I'm doing what? I'm hitting enter to pull it all back up again. So let's first see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here, because I want you to see this, plus str I. So now when I run this, it should be in the correct order there. So I want you to see it has to be in the correct order. So now this time I want to see it broken down, how all of this is working. Now remember, in order for me to do this, I have to be in scope of that loop. So I have to come up here and I have to put my console.log inside the for loop. So I'm going to hit shift enter to put a new line, control V, I'm just pasting it in. Now, so I have reverse, right? So one of the things I also want to do is I want to also check what is that, what's going on in that string reverse. I got to go ahead and put that back correctly because I switched it, remember? So now I got to go str, and then I'm using the plus sign, because remember, this is concatenation now. That plus sign is a concatenator. So now I want to check I want to do some checking, because I want to see what I am going to get back, how it's looping over. So now I'm doing a console.log. This time I just want to know what's inside. I'm going to do I first. And then from I, and then the next thing I want to see what's in the str. So now I'm going to run this because I want to see what's going on in this loop. All right, so it's giving me the index because that's why I wanted I. I is giving me the index 0, B. Then it goes to B, 1, L, 1, the number 1, I think that's the L because it's lowercase, LB. So now you see how it's storing it. It's putting it at first, the B will store, then the L is reversed, it's coming behind it. Then I go to index 2, which is U. Then it's placing it right here for me next inside of the index, and then E, which is the last one, which is at index 3, which is the E, and then it stores it at the EULB. Now I'm hoping that makes sense to you, but again, you got to play around with this code because you want to be able to see what it's doing so it can make sense to you. As you can see, I'm using my console to do a lot of my heavy lifting. Now notice that we don't use the plus equal operator within the loop, since reverse plus equal string I is the same as reverse equal reverse plus string I, which, what did I say? It's just going to leave it in order. So that's why we had to reverse it so it can store it the way we wanted it to store. So this has to be in the right order to reverse it to make sense. I hope that makes sense by me showing you how it works. Now let's break this down. Let's break this down step by step. This table shows the values of each of our variables after each loop iteration. So here's another breakdown right here that you can see on this table. And it said before the first iteration, not defined, and then empty string. But then we go to the first iteration, it gives me 0, and we saw that it's 0. So when I open this back up, it should still be there. You see it's matching up 0, B, B. So it's matching up so you can see it in the console for yourself. I just want to make sure you can see that. And then what happens if you reverse the order of the assignment statement within the for loop, so that, remember when we did this, so you can see what happens. That's why it's important to look at the examples and see what it's doing and play around with the code to help give you a better understanding. So summarizing an array. Another common use of an accumulator pattern is to compute some value using each of the elements of an array. This is similar to adding one in as one ... in as we did above, with the difference being we will use the items in an array rather than one ... in. So here we go. So we got the same examples, and then we're doing an array of 2, -5, 13, 14. And we know this is accumulated because we're initializing at 0, and we're going to do the exact same thing, and then it's going to come out to 52. So remember how the accumulator works. Do some math in your head, calculate it to make sure that this is the correct output. So we made it to the end of this section. I know this video was a little longer, but I wanted to go ahead and finish this up. It would have been a lot longer if I would have tried to do it all at once. And so hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next section.